She didn't scream. That's the part that stays with you. The glass was still in her other hand, still upright, not a single drop spilled, like her body had decided. Whatever happens next, don't make a mess. Don't give them a reason to make it worse. Because she knew, the way women in certain situations always know, that screaming wouldn't help. Nobody was going to help her. 200 people in that cabin, lights dimmed, most of them asleep or pretending to be. The ones who were awake looked away the moment it started, looked at their windows, their hands, their laps, anywhere that wasn't her face. His hand was around her wrist. She had been reaching past him to collect a glass. 1 second she was doing her job. The next second she wasn't going anywhere. He said something to her. Low, slow. The kind of voice that knows it can afford to be slow. I was 3 rows back. I saw everything. And I remember thinking, someone needs to stand up. Someone in this cabin needs to be the person who stands up right now. Nobody moved. The engines hummed. Somewhere below them, nothing. Just black ocean for 1,000 miles in every direction. No ground, no exit, no help coming from outside. This was Pan Am Flight 002. And in seat 14A, window side, economy class, a small, quiet man who had not said a single word in 3 hours slowly closed his paperback, set it down, and stood up. The man in 14C had been drinking since before they boarded. Nobody stopped him. Nobody flagged it. Nobody said a word. That's how it worked in 1972. You watched, you noted, you moved on. A man with money and a business-class manner could board a flight in any condition he liked. The rules bent toward people like him. They always had. His name was Robert Harrington, 42 years old, big, broad shoulders, the kind of build that fills a space naturally, and has never had a reason to apologize for it. He was an oil company executive returning from Hong Kong. The trip had gone badly. A deal he had spent 3 months building, meetings, dinners, handshakes, promises, had collapsed in the final hour. The other side walked. Just like that. 3 months gone in one afternoon. He was carrying that the only way he knew how. Glass after glass after glass. By the time Flight 002 lifted off at Hong Kong Kai Tak, Harrington was already somewhere past the point where most men would stop. But he didn't look it. He held himself together on the surface. Suit still neat, posture still straight. The kind of drunk that has had practice. The kind that knows how to wear it without showing it. Until it showed. Sarah Mitchell had clocked him within the first 40 minutes. She had been on this route long enough to know the difference between a passenger who drank to sleep and one who drank to feel something shift. Harrington was the second kind. She noted his row. Stayed on the far side of the cart when she could. Took the long way around, but the cabin was narrow, the rows were tight, and at 2 a.m., with most lights dimmed and most passengers unconscious, the cart had to go down every aisle. She reached past him to collect an empty glass. His hand came up, not slow, not stumbling, fast and deliberate. The speed of a man who has done something like this before and has never once been stopped. His fingers closed around her wrist. She went completely still. The glass in her other hand stayed upright. She held it there, some part of her body running on a separate track from everything else, keeping things level, keeping things from spilling, keeping things from becoming worse than they already were. She spoke to him, quietly, evenly. She had a script for this. Every flight attendant did. De-escalate. Stay calm. Do not create a scene. The passenger is the priority. Keep your voice low. He leaned closer, and it said something that made her go rigid from the shoulders down. And 3 seats away, in 14A, the small, quiet man who had not moved in 3 hours turned his head. There was a man in seat 16C. He had been sitting there since Hong Kong, window seat 3rd row back from the incident. To anyone who noticed him at all, he looked like a tired business traveler, jacket on, notepad in the seat pocket in front of him, eyes open but not engaged with anything in particular. He had not ordered a single drink. He had not slept. And from the moment Harrington's hand came up, this man had not looked away once. Nobody noticed that. Nobody was paying attention to seat 16C. Not yet. The small man in 14A had been on this route before. Hong Kong to Los Angeles. He knew it well. He was heading back for work. Pre-production on a film he had spent years building toward in an industry that had told him no in more ways than one. To everyone on that flight, he was just a face, a quiet man in economy class with a paperback and nothing to say. He had been reading the same page for 20 minutes, not because the words were difficult, because his mind was somewhere else entirely, until he heard the change in Harrington's voice. There is a specific tone a man uses when he has decided the normal rules don't apply to him right now. It doesn't have to be loud, but something in it is off. In the frequency, in the weight of it, in the way it fills the air without asking permission. The small man heard it. He looked up from his book. He took in the scene in about 2 seconds. Sarah's arm, Harrington's hand. The glass still held upright with the specific care of someone using every last resource to stay composed. He looked at the passengers nearby. A woman across the aisle had her eyes closed, too deliberately, the way people close their eyes when they're very much awake, and choosing not to be. The man 1 row ahead had found something fascinating about his tray table. 200 people on that flight, and in the rows surrounding what was happening, a practiced, collective absence. The small man watched this for a moment. Then he closed his book, set it on the tray table, and counted. He counted to 40. 40 full seconds, waiting, giving the situation a chance to resolve itself, giving Harrington every possible chance to make a different choice. Harrington did not make a different choice. At 40 seconds, the small man stood up. He stepped into the aisle. He was smaller than Harrington by 4 inches. Lighter by 60 pounds. Standing there in the narrow space between the rows, in the dim cabin light, he looked almost wrong, like he had miscalculated something, like he had stood up without fully thinking through what standing up meant. That's what the witnesses remembered later, that the first thing they felt when they saw him was not relief. It was worry. Harrington looked at him, that flicker behind his eyes, confusion, not fear. In Harrington's world, men like this didn't get involved. Men this size, this quiet, in economy class seats with paperbacks in their laps, they were background. They did not step into aisles. This one was standing 2 feet away from him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the small man spoke. 1 sentence. Quiet, not a whisper, but low enough that only the nearest seats could catch it. No aggression in it. No performance. It was the tone of someone stating something that is simply and completely true. He was giving Harrington a door, an easy exit. Let go of Sarah's wrist, settle back, have this be nothing. Over in 10 seconds. No scene, no memory. Everyone moves on. Harrington stared at him. Then he laughed. Short, dismissive. The kind that says, "I don't know who you think you are, but you've made a mistake." He released Sarah's wrist and grabbed the front of the small man's jacket with both hands. In seat 16C, the man who had not looked away this entire time reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small notepad, opened it to the first page, and wrote something down. Here is what Harrington knew in the 2 seconds after he grabbed that jacket. He was bigger. He was heavier. He had the aisle blocked. The small man had nowhere to go. Seat backs on both sides, the cart behind them, no room to create distance. In Harrington's world, those facts meant one thing. This was already decided. He pulled the small man forward. Nothing went the way he planned. The small man moved with the pull, not against it. Forward and slightly to the side, just a few inches. His left hand came up and found Harrington's wrist, and did something Harrington's brain did not process in real time. Something that used Harrington's own force as the mechanism. The grip broke. Harrington stood there for half a second, genuinely not understanding what had just happened to his own hands. He tried again. More force. A wider grab. Going for the collar. And again, the small man was not where Harrington's hands expected him to be. A small shift. Half a step. And Harrington's arm traveled further than it was designed to go, his balance going with it. He stumbled sideways. His shoulder hit the overhead compartment with a sound loud enough to wake 3 rows of sleeping passengers. Heads came up across the cabin, and in that exact moment, while Harrington was off balance, the small man's heel caught the base of the seat behind him. The aisle was too narrow. His weight shifted the wrong way. 1/2 second of real instability. Footing gone. I held my breath. I was not the only one. In 16C, the man with the notepad stopped writing. His pen stayed on the page. His eyes stayed on the aisle. For 1/2 second, the outcome was not written. Then the small man's feet reset. Weight forward. Both feet planted. Balance returned to his face and body simultaneously. Like a correction so practiced it happened below the level of thought. Harrington straightened up. He was breathing harder now, not from exhaustion. The confusion was gone from his face. In its place was something rawer. He looked at this small, still man standing in the dim aisle, and something in him that had been certain all night was no longer certain. He swung. The small man was not there. What happened in the next 4 seconds? I will not describe move by move. The witnesses don't agree on the details, and the details are not the point. The man in 16C described it better than anyone ever has. 20 years later, in the only interview he ever gave about that night, he said, "I've watched professionals fight. I've watched people who had trained their whole lives. What I saw in that aisle was not what I expected from someone that size. It wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. It was efficient, like watching someone solve a problem they had already solved 100 times before. And the thing that stayed with me, it ended before most of the cabin even understood it had begun." Harrington was in his seat, not unconscious, not badly hurt, just placed there, the way you'd move something to where it belongs. His hands were on his knees, his eyes on nothing. Whatever certainty had boarded this flight with him was not sitting in that seat anymore. The small man stood in the aisle for a moment. He straightened his jacket, one hand, 2 short movements, the same way you'd straighten up before walking into a meeting. Then he looked at Sarah. One brief look, the kind that asks a question without words. She nodded, small, almost invisible. He turned, walked back to 14A, sat down, reached for his book, opened it, and continued reading from exactly where he had stopped. The cabin was completely silent. That silence had a texture, not peaceful, not relieved, the specific silence of 200 people trying to find somewhere in their brain to file what they had just witnessed, and coming up empty. It wasn't a movie fight, no dramatic music, no slow motion, no hero standing tall. It was over too fast, too quiet, too ordinary in the way the small man returned to his seat. The woman who had been pretending to sleep was now very much awake, staring at the headrest in front of her with the expression of someone recalculating something important. The man who had been studying his tray table was looking at 14A with an expression he probably couldn't have named. Harrington sat in 14C with both hands on his knees, eyes on nothing. Sarah stood in the aisle. The glass was still in her hand, still upright, still not a single drop spilled. She looked at it for just a second. Then she walked to the back galley, set it carefully on the counter, and stood there with both hands flat on the surface. 30 seconds! She didn't move for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her tray, smoothed her uniform, and walked back into the cabin to finish her rounds. 3 rows back, in 16C, the man with the notepad looked up from the page, watched the cabin settle, watched Harrington sit motionless, watched the small man in 14A turn a page of his book. Then he looked back down and wrote something else. Nobody knew what he was writing. Nobody thought to ask. Here is where most people would think the story is finished, the situation resolved. The woman is okay. The aggressor is sitting quietly. The small man is back with his book. 14 more hours, and everyone goes home. That is exactly how it is supposed to feel right now, because it is not finished. 20 minutes after the confrontation, Sarah came back through the cabin on her regular round. She slowed at row 14. The small man looked up from his book. She said something quiet. He nodded once, then said 4 words back to her. Nobody who heard them has ever agreed on exactly what they were. Not because they were whispered, because they were the kind of words that sound too plain to be worth remembering, the kind that only carry their full weight if you were the one standing in that aisle earlier with a glass in your hand that you refused to drop. Sarah nodded, moved on, and in 14C, Robert Harrington slowly raised his hand. Not for whiskey, not for wine, for water. Sarah brought it without a word. He took it in both hands, sat with it, didn't drink right away, just held it and looked at the seat back in front of him. In 16C, the man with the notepad looked up. He watched Harrington hold that glass for a long moment. Then he wrote one more line, closed the notepad, slid it back into his jacket pocket, and for the first time since Hong Kong, he closed his eyes. His name was David Keller. He was not a regular passenger. He was a Pan Am duty supervisor, traveling back to Los Angeles on a deadhead assignment. Senior staff, flying as a non-revenue observer. Off the record. His job on these flights was to watch. How the crew performed under pressure, how procedures held in the long hours, how the cabin functioned when things went wrong. He had been watching since Hong Kong, but there was something else. When the small man in 14A had boarded, settled into his window seat, pulled out his paperback, disappeared into himself, Keller had gone still in a way that had nothing to do with his job. He recognized that face. 6 months earlier, during a layover in Manila, he had wandered into a local theater to kill 3 hours. A Hong Kong martial arts film was playing. He hadn't expected much. He stayed for the whole thing, and the lead actor, small, fast, with something in the way he moved that didn't look like choreography, that looked like the real thing, had stayed in his mind the way genuinely surprising things stay. He had recognized him the moment he stepped onto Flight 002. Bruce Lee, heading back to Los Angeles, economy class, traveling alone, completely unremarkable in every external way. Keller had spent 3 full hours sitting 16 feet behind him, watching him read. Before Harrington's hand ever moved, he had watched Bruce sit still for 40 seconds before standing up. He had counted. He had watched every moment of what followed, the approach, the offer of an exit, the grab, the 4 seconds of contact. He had watched Bruce return to his seat and open his book without looking around to see who was watching. And when it was over, the first thing Keller wrote in his notepad was this. He waited as long as he possibly could. He filed no official report. Not that night, not the next morning, not ever, through any formal Pan Am channel. 20 years later, a journalist found him for an unrelated story. Somehow the conversation arrived at that flight. Keller talked for 2 hours. The magazine ran 4 paragraphs. But the full account, every detail, described that night with a precision that matched nothing else ever written about it. The journalist asked why he had never filed a report. Keller said, "Because the moment I put it in official language, it became a different story. There was no form that could hold it correctly. So I kept it the only way I could." He was asked what he remembered most clearly. He didn't hesitate. The moment after, he sat down. He opened his book. He didn't look around the cabin. He didn't wait to see who was watching. He was already completely done with it, like it was something that needed to happen. So, he made it happen. And now, it was simply over. He paused for a moment. In 30 years of watching people under pressure, that is the rarest thing I have ever seen. To do the right thing and then immediately stop needing anything from it. The flight landed in Los Angeles the following afternoon. Passengers gathered their bags, filed into the aisle, moved toward the exits with the slow, stiff shuffle of people who had spent 18 hours sealed in a metal tube and were now remembering what gravity felt like. Bruce Lee deplaned like everyone else. He had a pre-production meeting the next morning. He showed up on time, sat down, got to work. Nobody in that room knew what had happened at 35,000 feet the night before. He didn't mention it. Not in that meeting, not in any interview, not in any record that anyone has ever found. It was simply something that had needed to happen. So he had made it happen, and now it was over. Robert Harrington stood at the baggage carousel and waited for his suitcase. He looked like every other exhausted passenger off an 18-hour flight. Tired, quiet, jacket slightly wrinkled. Nothing on the outside to tell you anything had happened, but something was sitting differently inside him. Not guilt exactly. Guilt is about what you did. This was wider than that. It was the image of that small man standing up in a dark aisle when nobody else would. The sense, even without knowing about the counting, that the man had waited, that he had given Harrington every possible chance to choose differently. And the faces of 200 people who had all decided in the same 2 seconds that this was not their problem. He had been that face before, many times, in offices, in restaurants, in moments when someone nearby needed something that wasn't his responsibility. He had looked at his hands, his lap, the middle distance. He had been, for most of his life, very efficient at deciding certain things weren't his concern. He picked up his bag, and instead of walking straight to the taxi line, he sat down on a bench just outside the terminal doors. The Los Angeles afternoon was bright and warm and completely indifferent to everything that had happened the night before. He sat there for a long time. 3 weeks later, back in Houston, Harrington picked up his phone. He called his son, 19 years old. They hadn't spoken properly in 8 months, since an argument over something Harrington could no longer remember clearly. His son had stopped calling. Harrington had told himself it was a phase, that the kid would come around. He had told himself that the way he told himself a lot of things. The phone rang 4 times. His thumb moved toward the end call button. Then, hello? Harrington didn't explain the flight, didn't describe the dark cabin or the glass held upright, or the small, quiet man who stood up when every single person around him was busy looking elsewhere. He didn't know how to explain any of that from the outside. He just said, "I know I haven't been great. I'd like to do better if you'll let me." Long silence on the line. His son said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. No warmth in it yet. Just a door, slightly open. And okay, that meant, "I'm listening. Don't waste it." Harrington held the phone and felt something loosen in his chest that had been locked in the same position for years. He still couldn't explain mechanically what had happened in that aisle. His grip had broken and he didn't know how. His balance had gone and he didn't know why. Some part of him had spent 3 weeks quietly replaying it, trying to find the moment where the physics stopped making sense. But he understood this. A man had stood up. Not because it was his job, not because anyone was watching, not because there was a single thing in it for him. He stood up because there was a person in that aisle who had no one standing up for her. And that, apparently, was reason enough. Harrington had never once in his life operated from a reason that simple. He thought, maybe it was time to start. There is one last thing about that night, one detail that Keller included in his account that nobody has ever been able to explain. Before Harrington grabbed Bruce's collar, in the 2 seconds between Bruce speaking and Harrington reacting, Harrington said something. 4 words. Keller heard them clearly from 16 feet away. He never repeated them, not in the interview, not in any follow-up. When the journalist pressed him directly, he said only, "I won't tell you what those 4 words were. But the moment I heard them, I understood completely why what happened next happened. And I understood something else. I understood why that small man had given him a way out first. Because he had already heard something in Harrington's voice. He knew exactly what he was dealing with. And he still tried to give him the door. He still gave him the chance to walk through it." He paused. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what happened in those 4 seconds. The fact that he tried to avoid it. Even knowing. Nobody knows what those 4 words were. Maybe that's how it should stay. Some things belong to the cabin where they happened, somewhere over black water at 35,000 feet, in an hour that no longer exists anywhere except in the memory of the people who were there. Sarah Mitchell retired from Pan Am in 1981. 9 years, hundreds of flights, thousands of hours across routes that took her to places most people only see in photographs. She had experienced things in those cabins that she never talked about publicly. Things that came with the job in 1972 in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Under those rules, with those protections, which is to say, almost none. She kept one thing from all of it: a glass, plain, nothing special. Standard economy class issue, the kind that sat on Pan Am service carts all through the 1970s, that thousands of passengers touched and forgot and never thought about again. Thick at the base, simple rim, the kind of object that exists only to be used and then discarded. She washed it carefully the night she got home, wrapped it, put it on a shelf in her kitchen. It stayed there through moves, through changes, through the whole long, ordinary span of a life lived after flying. Her daughter noticed it eventually, as daughters notice things that don't quite fit with everything around them, and asked where it came from. Sarah thought for a moment about how to answer that. She could have told all of it: the dark cabin, the dimmed lights, the hand around her wrist, and the trained voice in her head saying, "De-escalate, stay calm, do not create a scene." The 200 people who discovered all at once that there were very interesting things to look at that were not her, and the one who didn't. Instead, she said, "A quiet man reminded me that not everyone looks away." Her daughter nodded slowly. She didn't fully understand. Not yet. That was okay. The glass stayed on the shelf, catching the morning light when the kitchen was quiet and the rest of the house was still asleep. Not a single drop ever spilled.